Hello and welcome to Astrology and Magic. My name is Valkyria Verder. Welcome. That's Valkyrie of the Veil as a translation. And today we are going to be talking about spiritual initiation and consecration through the Neptune transits that are happening. Neptune, Pisces, and we're going to be going over into 2025. So this is going to be like a pretty big picture sort of podcast. We're going to be talking about a lot of different transits that are happening in Neptune or in Pisces with Neptune, with Saturn. There's a lot of really serious stuff that's happening in our spiritual lives recently, and it felt right. It feels like it's time that we bring it up and we talk about this particular happening. Before we get into the show, though, before we get into the details and everything that you need to know, I do want to give just some updates before we get into it. So my first update is that for now, I'm done taking on personal bookings, which is really wild, weird. It feels strange, but I need the shift. I need the rearrange. I'm kind of slowly going through and taking the time to take breaks from different aspects of my practice in the public spaces and reorganize my private life when it comes to that reflection. So I have been actually taking a break from doing the podcast. So if you've been patiently waiting for me to return, thank you, or being patient in my return. Thank you for that. And thank you for everyone. There's been lots of support that's been coming through and questions about when I'm going to return. YouTube videos are starting up again. I'm back. I'm back as a full-time doing what I need to do after months of getting sober and decompressing and de-stressing and working through some trauma and healing as we need to do. You know, the healer needs to be healed. And so I needed the time to sit and shield and wield and do what I needed to do. So thanks for your patience. And I'm also grateful to return to you. So so private bookings are done for now. If you're interested or in need of my offerings and services, I am still going to be in the practice of my live streams on TikTok, which for a while I wasn't doing those either, but I have returned to that as well. So if you are interested in that, the way that because I don't really have a schedule for that, so if you're in need of that, if you go to that profile page on TikTok and turn on the notifications, it'll let you know when I do my live streams. I am going to be doing them more frequently. Spirit has reminded me not to overwork myself, so I am going to be sitting in the balance how I need to, and that's just what it is. The other thing that has returned, lots of returns recently, it's been really beautiful. The other thing that has returned recently is my NFTs, and so my NFTs are up if you would like to become a larger financial supporter of the work that I do, not just the podcast, not just the TikTok videos, not just the YouTube videos, not just my sessions, not just that work, but the NFT collection. Part of the reason that I put it up was to really have a space where if people wanted to bring financial support to the work that I do in the spirit, because the work that I do in the spirit is really how I'm able to bring this information through to you, to people who are here to listen and learn and be reached with the information. So if you're interested in that return, I will put a link in the description or in the bottom part of this podcast, depending on the platform that you're on listening. So those are really the big updates. I'm slowing down, speeding up simultaneously. I'm doing away with some things for now. I'm returning to some things. It's been a great moment of triumph and victory, and there is not a lot of other words that I have for that in the moment. For now, let's get into today's show. And thank you for the time and the space to give you the updates. Beautiful. So today's show, spiritual initiation and consecration. We're looking at Pisces. We're looking at Neptune. It has come to my attention in my return to those TikTok live stream readings that because normally when I'm in those readings, I see patterns between, what's happening with certain people and kind of what's going on for our collective, even if it's not necessarily collective readings that I'm sitting in. I'm seeing the patterns of what people are going through, and I'm also seeing our collective transits in astrology. And I'm able to kind of look through and review for what I'm going through also. And there's a lot of people who are going through some pretty serious spiritual work right now. And not just spiritual work, but there's spiritual cleansing. There's spiritual practices that are being brought in. People are being brought into more sobriety. There's people who are being brought into discipline, more order in their lives and in their practices. And for a lot of people, myself included, for sometimes when there is that seriousness in the work, thank you, Spirit. Sometimes when there is that seriousness in the work, it means that there needs to be a bringing to the end of a fight, or the bringing of the end to what it is that we're doing that doesn't actually suit us, that doesn't actually benefit us, that doesn't actually allow us to be in our truth or to be in our authenticity, what doesn't actually allow us to be free. And you know what? I like being free, and I like being free in the spirit. So no more bindings that I don't need, and no more contracts that I don't need. Let's get it out. So let's talk about the transits. The first one that we have going on right now, actually, and kind of like a big overarching picture, I am going to be focusing more on our spirituality in the sense of like practice through these placements, and also because we have some serious things going on in Pisces, but we also have a lot of dark moon activations through the next 6 months or so. And so having those there's a lot of shadow placements that were active in the previous eclipse too. So we have this kind of bigger theme right now happening where we have these shadow placements that aren't normally as activated. That through that Aries eclipse, we had Chiron super active with the North Node, and there was a bunch of passings over with Chiron. It was super highlighted, and there was a lot of healing, lots of triggering, lots of new work with that. We also just had, I don't know the exact date on this, it was a couple days ago, we also just had a Mars and a Chiron conjunction in Aries, which I know for me, I felt obliterated by that. So if you had a day of just crying, it is that it needed to be. I've been talking to some other people too, and it's been kind of a collective theme of just letting go of some traumas and triggers that we needed to. But generally speaking, there's been a big overarching theme of just the shadows they're up and they're active. We right now have an opposition happening with Neptune as it's in 29 degrees, which is already really serious. The 29th degree is, in my opinion, the death degree. People normally in astrology and like in our narratives in astrology call this the critical degree because things get critical, but it's also the end of things. The reason I call this the death degree is because if you're at the end of life and you're feeling privileged enough, you have the time and the space and the energy and the support while you are coming to a close and to an end, then you're able to move your inheritances to go to where they need to go. The things that you have worked on are being able to be passed on how they need to be passed on. There's lots of different transfers, delegations. You're also wrapping up your spiritual lessons of your life. And it may not be your entire lifetime, although granted that is applicable. It might be going through a chapter of your life or a season of your life. Also, Neptune is like a 13-year transit. That's a long time. And I know for myself, like I have only been an adult for, what is it now? Like 10 years, 9 years, 10 years, something like that, like legally. So for a lot of us, this transit has been happening for most of our more serious, a lot of us in the younger years, a lot of more seriousness in the, how do I say this? Like, our lives as children start in like our teenage years or younger than that, because I know there's some people who listen to my work who are younger than that too. Our lives as children, there was like this start of spiritual initiation, like we were starting that spiritual initiation. So the reason that this episode today is about spiritual initiation and consecration is because for some people, that 13, 14 years of that Neptune transit is an active initiation. There's a reason that we have timings with those initiations. There are, in my experience, 7-year initiations, there's 11-year initiations, 13-year initiations. Those are the initiations I'm personally familiar with. And because we're ending that Neptune transit, we're done with those 13 years. So there's like a really, 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 really big close coming through with that. And that means if you've been going through some form of initiation, there needs to be a consecration. There needs to be a finalization. There needs to be an ending. It needs to be drawn and closed and done and through so that you can move on when our transit is done. And it's really time for more fun and for different practices and for a different lifestyle and for different. We also, too, a little bit more background information, we also had Pisces influence, and we're going to be experiencing that until our next eclipse season, because our previous eclipses, if you listen to that episode about the eclipse season, Libra is ruled by Venus. Venus was in Pisces for that eclipse. We also had Mars in Pisces for the Aries eclipse. So we had this undercurrent of spiritual transformation happening through those eclipses, and it will be affecting us until our next eclipse season. Right now, with that dark moon placement, dark moon being in opposition to that Neptune. Neptune is super serious at 29 degrees. So we're being called to sit very seriously in our practices. There's a lot of wisdom that we're probably going through, marking up things. If you're thinking about kind of going through a book and writing notes, if you're reading back the story of the 13 years, writing notes about your life and what you've been through, what you've learned in the spirit. And because of that dark moon, the dark moon has to do with that manipulation, betrayal. I just put up a video on YouTube actually about the dark moon if you wanted to see a little bit more information about that. But dark moon has to do with it's the mother wound. It's not just mother wound. It's very much our deepest, darkest pleasures and our ability to sit in those deep, dark pleasures and not be shamed or blamed or gamed. It's also in that deep, dark pleasure, making sure that we're healed so that if we are to wield that power of manipulation in the world, we're not creating manipulation that then harms other people. Because what happens too is if you have been manipulated by others through this placement and there has been harm that's happened, then sometimes that can transfer to there being kind of this not understood yet portion of that. Because how do I say this? If you're blind to your trauma, probably it's for a reason. It might not be your season to sit in it. And also, with all the dark moon activations that we're having from now until and through the next eclipse season, we're really being asked to sit in that shadow place and not just sit, but quit. Sit and quit and move on and move forward. Sit and quit and move on and move forward. Because if there are things that you have been sitting in the darkness with that don't actually really resonate with you, or sitting in your subconscious with that don't actually really resonate with you, or sitting in your patternings, because we also have Saturn in Pisces right now influencing this. So in your patterning or in how you organize your life, it could be your relationship with food, and because it's in Virgo, so our relationship with food, our relationship with our body, and those shadows, how that has been used against us possibly, and how we are also feeling very confident in that, because that's the other side of working through those traumas, is being able to tell almost anyone that it's not their business and it's your power. It's your power. One of the other things too, as a fundamental about the dark moon, just for understanding, is that if you have anything with, let me back it up. Let's back it up for a moment. If you're someone who is very creative, even the dark moon will influence that form of creativity. Anything that kind of popped up in your heart and your mind when I was speaking on, if you're someone who's creative. It could be painting, could be music, could be craft work, it could be you're creative with sciences. There's so many different kinds of creativity in our lives, but creativity, it is a form of manipulation. We're manipulating the elements. We're manipulating our emotions. There's a process of manipulation through that. And so that dark moon, if it's left unhealed, you're still going to be wielding it through your process of creation, whether you look at it or not. So in my personal opinion, it is so much easier to sit with your process of creation if you allow yourself the time and the energy and the space in your personal capabilities to sit with that dark moon in shadow, in the dirt, because the dark moon is super dirty and it's gross and it's messy and it's kind of ugly, to be honest. It's not super pretty to sit in that placement. It's not a placement that is aesthetically appeasing. Yeah, it's not pretty. It's not a pretty placement. It's the placement where you're getting down into like the dirt and the grime of being a human and what that looks like. And there's a lot of really like messed up stuff that can happen in the darkness of being a human in our humanity. So it's also like, if you don't have the capacity or the stability, the fundamental. However, if it shows up in your life and you're just not able to do it, don't force yourself to do it either. So, be aware of your own trauma and your own triggers and your own abilities and capabilities with where you are in your life. Don't just sit with it because me as a person on the internet said that it was time to, like, if you feel called to do it, do it. But if not, then don't force yourself into it. For the safety of your health, it is what it is. So moving back into that's more just like prerequisite information. With that opposition of that Neptune placement at 29 degrees being super serious with our spiritual lessons, and then we have that dark moon it's also approaching 29 degrees. We have Neptune at 29 degrees and we have the dark moon approaching 29 degrees in Virgo. So both of them are really serious right now. We're wrapping up really serious lessons, lots of serious shadow lessons, lots of serious feminine lessons within our spiritual practices. Just so many, it's so serious. Like right now is such a serious time. And to mention the fact also, we have Saturn. I brought it up earlier, but Saturn is still in Pisces. Saturn is a big part of this spiritual initiation consecration. It's like we've been through these 11 years, 13 years, 11, 12, 13 years of this transit of having Neptune in Pisces, and Saturn's coming through in the final couple of years to be like, all right, well, you've learned your lessons. We got to bring order now. We have to bring order because you've learned the lessons, but there needs to be application, especially with that Piscean energy where things are really like, it's wishy-washy. There's a lot of in-between spaces. Sometimes it's not so clear. So if you are feeling that there is illumination on things that have not been illuminated for the previous, again, like 13-ish years, that probably makes sense. Saturn is, you can't be blind when Saturn moves through a sign. And so having that really serious Saturn placement moving through this is Saturn is like, all right, well, you have done the work. And how you have worked has shown you your order. So now let's finalize that order. Let's bring the order to order and be through with it and be done. Let's move on. So Saturn is here to help us really kind of clean it up. And one of the things that came through in one of my readings yesterday too is that if you're going through a time period right now where you're like going through the battles and going through the fights, or maybe you've been through a death period, especially with that South Node in Scorpio over the previous couple of years, you've been through this death period. After there has been destruction and death, there has to be the clearing out of that destruction and death. You have to give it a resting place. And so that's also a part of this process in bringing that finalization. Thank you, Spirit, for bringing that through. That's also a part of this process of finalization. So, as we're moving through, some things to look out for with the transits that are happening. We do have retrogrades coming up. So that opposition is going to be kind of one of our primary focuses when it comes to spiritual happenings and all of the information that's come before this in the episode. Then we have our Neptune retrograde. So let's talk about the dates of these things because there's some interesting happenings. July 2nd to December 7th of this year is when Neptune, this year being 2024, that's when Neptune is retrograde. So we have the reconsiderations of our spiritual practices, the reconsiderations of the direction that we're going in, the reconsideration of our gifts. There could be insecurities that come up. There could be some different, because it's also trickster energy in Pisces. So there could be some different lessons that you need to return to within your spiritual practices that have to do with possible shapeshifter form, trickster form. Sometimes that energy is not so warm. Sometimes it is water energy. That's true. And sometimes it's a little bit cold. So do what you need to do for that. Take care of yourself as you're learning through that process. This is also to reconsideration of where we want to go with our direction in our spiritual practice. So if you're feeling that you want to change direction, or you've been in a kind of practice, or maybe there's different practices in your life that you've been keeping that you realize don't actually work for you or don't actually benefit your life, then that's also going to be a part of this reconsideration. And that's a pretty long retrograde. That's about half the year, July 2nd to December 7th. So the other retrograde that we have happening in the Pisces energy is a Saturn retrograde, and that starts on June 29th, so the end of this month, and then that goes until November 15th. We did have a Saturn retrograde the previous year. If you wanted to hear more about that Saturn retrograde, there's another episode earlier on in the podcast if you want to go check that out. But this retrograde, it's going to be more serious. The other one, the other retrograde in Saturn, we had this ability to kind of like reconsider, start something over. Start over completely. Like that Saturn retrograde brought us back to 0 degrees in Pisces. So we had this opportunity and ability to start over, and we don't really ever have that opportunity with Saturn. So it was really like if you needed a pass on something or a fresh start on something, really was like a pass. Like, here's your card, here, pass, go, collect $200. Like that was kind of that Saturn retrograde for us. Granted, Saturn is still work, but we were able to really come back and have this space of like, actually, thank you for the safety in that Saturn. We weren't able to do what we needed to do in the direction that we were going in. So this reconsideration of thank you, Spirit. This reconsideration with Saturn, June 29th to November 15th, is really going to be focused on the more serious lessons that we've been learning through because we are returning to Pisces again in another retrograde, I believe later on in 2025 after Saturn enters Aries. I don't know the exact dates for that, but it does retrograde back into Pisces after it enters into Aries. So it might be closer to 2026, to be honest with you. But this retrograde, again, it's going to be serious. There's going to be it's not going to be the most serious thing that's happening with Pisces energy with the Neptune being at 29 degrees, but it is going to be influenced by that Neptune at 29 degrees because Neptune rules Pisces. So we have, there's a lot of serious lessons that are happening in the spirit. It just is. It is what it is. If you find that there are people around you who are not benefiting you, probably draw some boundaries and borders. That's part of Saturn, is making sure that there are boundaries and borders, that you know what your boundaries and borders are. So like understanding who you share your practice with, why you're sharing it with them, when do you share it with them, how are you sharing it with them, and what are the layers of safety for you in that. Also, if you check out for yourself where Pisces is in your chart, like the area of life, the house that it's in, that's going to be where this order, if you're needing to sit with more order and understand it. So say you kind of see in multiple areas of your life that there are spiritual lessons, or you're seeing kind of this pattern that comes through. If you go back to that house that is ruled by Pisces, if you go back to that area of your life and ground the lessons, allow them to come through and ground for you, because Saturn, it can be very earthy. Bringing that order, it does have the ability to ground. So if you're going back to that area of your life, it'll be easier to integrate where that Pisces energy is, rather than it just being in, because it's Pisces energy, so it kind of goes into everything. So if you're having there be these moments of like, okay, what is it? What is the big overarching picture of this lesson? And actually, that's another part of Saturn retrograde, is the big overarching picture. We kind of get a big overview of what it is that we've been through. We're less focused on the details, and we're more focused on, okay, this is actually the umbrella. This is what is covering us right now. This is like the really big picture. And so that's another thing that we're going to be reconsidering. It's not just reconsidering the details. It's not just reconsidering the day-to-day. It's reconsidering the big picture of what has this year brought me, or what have these final years of this Neptune transit brought me? What is this big overarching picture? What has that brought me? And what is the order that I have because of that? And do I agree with that order? And if I do agree with that order, great, let's ground it. And if I don't agree with that order, let's surround it, reorganize it, figure it out. Maybe it needs to be pushed out or forgotten about, and then we'll move on and remove that, move forward, and bring something else in. Because that's another thing too. If you're removing something, there needs to be something that comes through to help you with the order keeping. This is not Venus energy, so there's not it flows out, it flows back in. There are Venus placements we're going to talk about as we go forward, but it's not a Venus energy. Generally speaking, Venus is you give something, there's something received. If you're removing something from your order with Saturn, then there needs to be more order brought somewhere else. And that really only happens if you're the one activating it. Otherwise, someone else is going to activate that order for you. Personally, I like to have my order be my order, but that is up to you and your discernment, however you feel like you need to move forward with that. So do what you need to do. It is. The other kind of interesting thing that is going to be happening is that when Saturn, literally the day the Saturn goes retrograde, I don't know whether to laugh about this. I don't really know how I feel about this, to be honest with you, but is interesting regardless of my feelings about it. June 29th is when the Saturn retrograde starts, and June 29th is also when the black moon or the dark moon enters Libra. So we have the Saturn retrograde with this big picture of reconsiderations, new order, old order being removed, where the changes, the shifts, the rearranges. And then at the same time, we have the start of Libra bringing through these really dark lessons and these really dark spaces. So good luck. I don't know if we're going to need it, but it feels like we're going to need it. So good luck. Not in a sense of fear, but just like it's a very serious time. Make sure that you're keeping up on your shadow work as you need to. There's so many different kinds of shadow work. There's the internal shadow work. There is spiritual shadow work. There is shadow work in meditation. There is shadow work within our activities. There are so many different kinds of shadow work. This is not a time that you want to avoid it, because then going into the Libra eclipse in October, it's October 2nd of 2024. I want to bring a highlight because there is preparation. Preparation has been one of the really big themes that Spirit has having me been sit with recently, and it is June 1st at 1234 on my calendar as I look over right now. Wow, thank you, Spirit. All right. Beautiful. The order, bringing it in new. Like, to be at number 2, you have to be prepared at number 1. To be at number 3, you have to be prepared at number 2. You can't move forward from where you are unless you are in preparation, unless you are being prepared. So there are many of us through this eclipse season, from the previous eclipses to the next eclipse, like this gap in between the eclipse, the 6 months, where we're focusing on transition. That's part of Pisces energy. We're focusing on transition. We're focusing on moving forward. We're focusing, especially after the death period and the grief period and the really, really tough work period of the South Node being in Scorpio. A lot of us want to move on and move forward from that. And that's part of the work that we're doing right now, is to place ourselves in a, quote, better life, something that suits us more, something that's more elevated for us, something that we're more sure about, something that's more true for us. And so going through that transition is a change in position, but for us to be able to be there and to receive what we're asking for, we're in preparation. We need to be in the preparation. So being prepared. So talking about this Libra eclipse that's up and coming, in preparation, this is some things to be mindful about. And the reason that I'm bringing up the dark moon is not just because of this opposition with Neptune. Yes, it's important, but the dark moon is a part of a 5 orb degree conjunction of, I think it's like 5 different placements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5. 5 different placements for that Libra eclipse. The dark moon is one of those 5 placements that will be in a conjunction. And what I mean by a 5 degree orb is like they're within 5 degrees of each other. So that's technically a really large conjunction. That's like not normally considered a conjunction, but since it's an eclipse, eclipse is really big energy. So we're going to call this one a conjunction. Mercury is going to be at 11 degrees in Libra. The black moon or the dark moon is going to be at 11 degrees in Libra. So that actually is an exact conjunction. Then we have the sun at 9 degrees in Libra. We have the moon at 9 degrees because it is the eclipse. So we have that happening. And then the south node is at 6 degrees. And yeah, that's, we also too, I want to talk about this as well before we move into like the specificities of those placements. Venus, which is the ruler of Libra, is going to be in Scorpio at 11 degrees. So we actually have a really big scorpionic influence with everything that's happening. So not only is a part of this conjunction going to be the black moon or the dark moon, and it's a new moon eclipse, which is darkness. Venus is going to be ruled by Scorpio, which is the darkness. So we have 3 different influences of darkness in this area. This is really to be prepared for this. This is not to be scared, because that was another thing that came through in a reading yesterday too, is like, don't be scared of being prepared. If you're prepared, then when you get there, you're probably not going to be scared. That's part of the preparation. If you're scared of your dreams, or you're scared of what you want, valid time to confront possibly that you're afraid of what you want. And so if you're able to confront that, then usually it dissipates, it disappears, because you're able then to do the work. We all have different relationships with fear, so let it be clear, do what you need to do. It is, and let it be true for you, because you work differently and you know what is going to be the best for you, and more true for you than anyone else is able to tell you. So that Venus being in Scorpio, it also has the degree of like secrets. This is an eclipse. Sometimes people will do like eclipse events or this and have other people don't. This is an eclipse where you want to be really private and really secret. This is not an eclipse that you would want to include other people. This is not an eclipse, unless there is an inclusion in the work that you're asking for a very, 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 very long time. There are so many dark placements happening. There's so much shadow. There's so much darkness. And what happens when the darkness comes around? The mothers come through. The mothers come through when there's darkness abrew. So if there really is a big transition, a moment of confirmation, no longer being in contemplation for your spiritual initiation and this consecration of these different trials and different learnings and lessons, they're not just trials, sometimes styles that you've been going through. There's an eclipse in Libra on October 2nd of 2024 that's bringing through everything that you've asked for. For you to be prepared for that, discernment in your discipline, discernment in your darkness, and making sure too, for yourself, how you're asking yourself to be. It's different for every person in every degree. How you're asking yourself to be sure that those dark spaces are clear. Bring light to them if you need to. Bring your eyes to them if you need to. However it is that you need to work through what is in the darkness, I urge you to prepare your shadow spaces and places. For if there is not preparation before this eclipse and through this eclipse also, of shadow, of mother, of consecration, of that spiritual initiation, if you feel that those words apply to you. If there's not preparation, there's going to be an eclipse that comes through, and everything you outgrew is something you're going to now be forced to do. So you're going to have to return and relearn lessons you've already learned because there wasn't application. And you're going to have to wait your turn instead of being able to go on and go forward and move forward. This is pretty serious. It's a pretty serious turning point. So, feel like, is there anything else that needs to come through for that? There is not. I also want to point out, too, for this, that we have Mars in Cancer for eclipse season. I'm not really going to talk about the Aries eclipse. That's the full moon eclipse that's happening in September. That's September 18th, also, if you're curious about that date or interested about that date. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I do want to bring in that Mars is in Cancer for the eclipse season. So every single victory that we are sitting with, we're going to really need to be in tune with our emotions and with our transits of the moon. So if you're someone who's felt called to start getting into moon practices and moon magic, for sure, slowly start to integrate that for yourself, because come that Mars going into Cancer, we're really going to need to be aware of the moon cycles and our feelings and our emotions, of what it is that we're feeling, what are people around us feeling, because Mars is also a placement where other people could claim victory on us, and that will be done through our emotions, or their emotions rather, and feelings. So that awareness is something that will help to probably ground any of the maybe not so grounded stuff that's happening in the shadow spaces, if that's work that you're going to be in and or already in. So that the seriousness of that, it is, yeah. And then let's see. So Saturn goes direct on November 15th. There are some pretty serious, again, very serious. Saturn is serious, and there's some pretty serious aspects happening. It's squaring Mercury in Sagittarius. It's also squaring a Jupiter retrograde in Gemini. So we have these really serious conversations of information, the sharing of information. We also have the seriousness in with Saturn. Jupiter is expansion, Mercury is information, and we have Mercury is in Sagittarius and Jupiter is in Gemini. So those placements right now are actually reflecting each other, because Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, and they're in their opposite places. So that's a really big conversation that will be happening there. This episode is not necessarily about that, but just be careful of the information that you share. Don't overshare anything. That's kind of a theme with Jupiter and Gemini overall, because anything that you give to people you can't control how people expand the information that you offer to them. And so just making sure that you are keeping it zipped if you need to, keep it lipped if you need to, keep it gripped if you need to, and don't overgive your information. Let yourself live, be free in it, and also keep your secrets for yourself. Then we also there's a Saturn that so speaking of the dark moon, I wanted to kind of reflect on that when Saturn goes direct. What is that gonna look like? It's quincunx to the dark moon, Saturn is. And the dark moon will be in Libra then, Saturn's still in Pisces. A quincunx is 150 degrees apart, so it's almost completely in opposition, but not quite. Those aspects are in the shadow. They do affect us, and they have and they do direct us. They have pretty open conversations. Like, it's not as like, imagine if you're sitting at a big round table. All right, the person across from you, that opposition, is the only way really that you're going to be able to talk to them is if you're having really big conversations, or you're talking about things that everybody else can hear. It's not a very secretive conversation. It's probably going direct the information that everyone else is talking about also. So oppositions are pretty big things. If there's someone sitting directly next to that person that's right across the table from you, and they're maybe facing that person that would be directly across the table from you rather than directly facing you. But every once in a while in that pretty big conversation, they turn and they give you a smile, or they give you a side eye, or they look at you, and like, you have that sort of information through conversation. You could choose not to look at them, though. You could choose to ignore that person who's sitting next to this opposition where you're having this big conversation. That person who is next to this opposition, so in this case the dark moon, they might say something every once in a while, but normally they're just going to sit there and smile while the big conversation is happening, while the big conversation takes place. So if you're able to pay attention to, at that point with our dark moon energy, if you're just able to sit and kind of look at it, there isn't going to be too much direct information that's coming from that, but there is going to be some like side comments through indirect communication. So if you've been doing the work with that energy, there might be some pretty big relief that comes through for you. And one of the things too about the dark moon is that it's not always, yes, it can be about trauma work, and yes, it can be about that healing work and empowering yourself. And normally those traumas are really deeply rooted within us if they're there. But also, it's really empowering to go through and look at that matriarchal lineage and see kind of like what has come before you and why you are the way that you are when it comes to those mother energies, and remove what you need to remove. Like, it can be so empowering, and it is, in my experience, it is a very empowering practice. So there is. And that's part of the reason that I say that this is really serious, is because if there are any people around you in that darkness, in that under influence, where if you're not paying attention, they could sneak on through, who have already done this work and they're stronger than you in these shadows, then that's part of this preparation. Because people who are able to really sit in the shadows and work in the shadows, and there's there's really a lot of power for them in the shadows. Their work is going to be very amplified. And for you too, if you're someone who does a lot of work in the shadows and you're doing a lot of work in the shadows and you're weaving and you feel like you're done grieving and you've been uplifting yourself and empowering yourself, then there's going to be a lot of power that's offered to you through these placements and transits. For those of you who, kind of the forewarnings that I gave earlier, that the forewarning would be for people who maybe have been avoiding the work or feel called to the work and are maybe a little bit of afraid of it. It's might be time to sit in that. But if you're someone who has been doing the work and feels really good about that placement, and for your dark moon and your chart and the dark moon transits, even my voice wants to change, my goodness, and the dark moon transits that are coming up, definitely allow yourself the space and the time to really understand. Let your power land, really, is what's happening. Let your power land. Let it land. Let yourself ground in it, and let yourself surround yourself in that power also, because you know what, when you do the work, there is receivings, and if you've done the work to receive that power, there's going to be more of it here coming through. So good for you. What else do we have going on? So also the day that Neptune goes direct. So speaking on that, and just to brush up on that again, the date for when Neptune goes direct is December 7th. So the day that Neptune goes direct, we have Moon and Saturn are both in Pisces with Neptune. So there's going to be an emotional influence with this. We're also having a Venus and a Pluto conjunction that day in Aquarius at 0 degrees. So our Pluto retrograde will be over at that point, and we will be having a Venus and Pluto conjunction in Aquarius. It's going to be there's some people who might consider that aspect of a sextile. There's some people who might consider that aspect a semi-sextile. Technically, with Neptune's going to be in a later degree of Pisces. I think it's like 27 degrees. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it's 27 degrees. And that conjunction of Venus and Pluto is happening at 0 degrees. So it's not quite a sextile, but it's closer to being sextile, which is 60 degrees, than it is a semi-sextile, which is 30 degrees, even though the signs are right next to each other. So it really depends how you're looking at that. It could be interpreted kind of either way, but for me, I'm going to sit with more of a sextile on that one, which is 60 degrees. And really, that means there's a lot of like reproductive energy. It's very fertile. Sextile aspects are very fertile. It's a very like reproductive multiplication, not how do I say this? Not necessarily like exponents, unless you have Jupiter Sagittarius involvement in that, like an exponential, but there is multiplicity, like the multiplication instead of addition. And so having a Venus and Pluto, a lot of power of receiving, asking ourselves to be very powerful in what we're receiving. There could be some contractual bindings that come through around that time about what it is that you want to receive, and having the new come through. So just allowing yourself to be really aware of what that new coming through is and what are you willing to have in that contract, and because it's a contract that you're probably not going to be able to take back, because Neptune is going to move out of Pisces. We're done with that retrograde. Pluto's done with its retrograde. We're not going to be going back to Capricorn. It will be in Aquarius at this point, but that once we have that Pluto retrograde over and this Neptune goes direct, that when we have these contracts and contractual bindings, which could be direct or they could require you to further inspect, really depends on how Pluto is moving for you and with you in your practice, because Pluto is a part of the study of the will. So it's a lot about your decision and how you're moving with your decision to learn and return, and your decision to also bring through thank you, Spirit, also bring through the ability to sit with your decisions, understand your decisions, and then also what in that contractual obligation is direct and what requires you to further inspect. If you don't sit and further inspect, then you're probably not even going to be aware that there is a contract there. So there does need to be some further inspection if you require it of yourself, because if you don't, then that's just what it is. That's Pluto is the will. So there is going to be a lot of like possibility of new coming through with the day that Neptune goes direct. It could be a day where we have, like, if you're keeping up your order and you've been waiting or wanting for something and the work has been there and you're asking yourself to continue to sit in that work, then when we have this November 15th Neptune goes direct, then there we are. We're receiving the benefit. We're like actually in the reception and the receiving energy, and that's going to be in continuation for a while, probably until Venus passes through Pisces, which I don't have the date for that, but probably like a couple months into 2026, more than likely, is when we'll have the effect of that aspect from when Neptune goes direct kind of wear off completely finally. Then we have, this is getting into next year. So that's for the rest of this year, and then getting into next year. We have the lunar node shift into, actually, you know what? I think, to be honest with you, I'm going to end this episode here because how long have we been? Yeah, it's about 45 minutes long. I feel like I'm going to end this here. I'm going to make a part two. I'm going to make a part two for this because I haven't gone through, like when I was getting this episode set up, I didn't go through and do every single conjunction that's happening for that next year of when we have the north node switches into Pisces and the lunar nodes. I was trying to say north and node at the same time. That did not work. But the lunar nodes are changing. So from there, though, there's so many. There's going to be even more layers of that consecration and even more layers of finalization as we move into really like through May of that next year. But I don't have all the details on that because as I was writing down and preparing for the episode, I realized I probably didn't need all that information. And now that we've been through everything that we have in this episode, I feel like that's enough for us. I don't really want to look at the next year yet, you know? I feel like we have a lot to focus on for right now and right here where we are, and let us receive the work and the benefits of that at the end of the year. Let's not overwhelm ourselves. I don't want to overwhelm myself. And we'll know when we grow. Like there's some things that we're not going to know about those conjunctions and happenings until in the next year, until we get there. So there is going to be some pretty important Pisces aspects that are coming up at the beginning of the next year, and doing the preparation work this year with the Saturn and the Neptune and that dark moon also working through those shadows. Because really what happens is if you work through those shadows and you clear it out, then you're offered the power that is there. So that's important work to prepare us for where we're going and where we're headed. But yeah, I feel like that is a wonderful place to to come to a close. And you know what? I am grateful for that. Beautiful. So thank you for being here. And I give my love and my gratitude and my reverence to you. I give my love, gratitude, and reverence to the highest spirit, to the great mother spirit, to the great father spirit, to the spirits and the mothers and the fathers and the ancestral spirits and the astrological spirits and the indigenous spirits of where you are and where I am. And love, truth, elevation, and free in the highest order that there is, can, has been, and ever will be. Thank you, these spirits, for coming through and for offering to me these wisdoms that have been here. Thank you for the messages that have been made clear. Thank you for the wisdom that has been prepared for us to receive. Thank you, the spirits. And I give my love and my gratitude and my reverence again to you. Let us leave. You know, the previous several years have been very intense. The previous several years have been more than intense. They have been put up a fence and guard your heart. That's what the previous years have been, really, with that South Node in Scorpio. So let us move through. Let us move on. Let us prepare ourselves to not be wrong and to be strong. Be strong. Be strong. Yes. So that is the end of the episode today. And again, I give my love, gratitude, and reverence to you. Do what you need to do. Go and brew. And I love you. And I will be bringing through more episodes for you probably very soon.